Tonight, we will not climb walls or count soldiers carved from clay. Instead, we will walk toward a hill that has been watching the centuries pass without ever opening its mouth. The mound lies on the way plain like a dark, patient animal, its flanks soft by grass and rain. Its shape so ordinary that travelers pass without turning their heads. Yet the chronicles whisper that under this quiet skin lies an entire city. Chambers lined with bronze, a ceiling painted to hold the stars in their exact places. And deep beneath it, all rivers that do not dry are flood rivers, made of liquid silver moving forever through the dark. The wind tonight barely stirs the cypress branches, as if even the air does not wish to wake what sleeps below. Priests once sealed the gates here with curses and molten lead. Centuries of storms have swept over it. Empires have risen and fallen. Earthquakes have cracked palaces to rubble, yet the doors remain shut, the tomb unopened. It has outlasted every hand but time itself. So lower the lights. Let the hill's silence press softly against your chest. If you stay awake until the final lock is described, the story will be here. If you drift off before then, the hill will keep its watch, and the rivers will continue flowing in the dark, untouched by sleep or daylight. And yet, for all its silence, the hill is not empty. Beneath its layers of earth and legend lie corridors that once felt the weight of builders' footsteps. Chambers sealed so carefully that even the air seems trained not to escape. The records speak softly of an emperor who wished to be surrounded by stars, rivers, and an empire compressed into a single resting place, a city folded inward, built for one man's eternity. To step closer is to feel history leaning against the door, listening. The mound on the way plain stands silent, a green oval of cypress trees shaped like a sleeping giant. Travelers pass along the road, carts clatter, dust rises and falls, but the hill keeps its stillness, as if guarding a secret it has carried for 2,000 years. Beneath its slopes, chronicles speak of an underground palace built for one man, a city folded into earth, with rivers of liquid metal said to flow through chambers sealed against time. The walls above have heard only wind. The stones below have heard nothing at all. History remembers the emperor's armies, his walls, his maps, even the soldiers of clay that stand watch in endless rows. But here, under this quiet hill, another story waits in darkness, untold. At dawn, the air around the mound is the color of old rice paper. On most mornings, a groundskeeper sweeps the path with a broom whose bristles have learned the shape of the gravel. The hill was built when bronze mirrors were high technology, and books were bamboo and silk, yet the landscaping has settled into comfortable modern habits. A ticket kiosk, a sign reminding you not to bring in snacks, a gardener debating very quietly with a sprinkler. The emperor inside wanted to continue, not merely to be remembered. He organized in death with a focus that would have made a very tidy spreadsheet if spreadsheets had existed. The sources say he commanded palaces below and constellations above, a ceiling that remembered the patterns of the night, and a floor that remembered the shape of the earth. You can imagine a foreman with an abacus and a reliable frown, measuring darkness in units of lantern oil, worrying whether the lacquer has cured, whether the cinnabar is bright enough to satisfy a man who believed even mountains could be edited. The hill breathes like a sleeping bellows. Somewhere under the soil, corridors run like lines on a poem. For centuries, people have sketched them in their minds. Here, a north passage, there, a chamber for miniature lakes, and farther on a central hall where the emperor's couch waited beside a map of the world, so precise that the rivers flowed as well as the real ones. It is an engineering dream, logistics pretending to be magic, patience pretending to be stone. Teams of workers would have counted bricks the way monks count beads. And when they placed the last square of earth, they packed it quietly, pressing the seal on a letter no one would open. The great project made a statement so modest that it has taken 2 millennia to finish saying it. Let the empire carry on, and let its traffic find a way around. The hill does not interrupt anyone. It has the manners of an old librarian. There is, of course, the rumor of traps. Not so much the adventure movie kind as the careful office kind. Crossbows bent and bound to stay alert. Channels meant to redirect intruders into pointless journeys. Doors whose insistence on being doors becomes an entire philosophy. It is said that when the last workman finished, they were thanked and then no longer available for comment. This might be unpleasant, but in a way it shows you the project management style. Comprehensive. The tomb was designed to survive unauthorized access and the weather, in that order. Conservationists today, in a much gentler spirit, maintain the same policy. They explain that opening a sealed ancient house doesn't simply unlock history. It also invites oxygen, humidity, and 1,000 tiny problems with Latin names. Sometimes the bravest act is to make a very precise map, put down your trowel, and walk away. Yet the phrase that keeps returning is the one about rivers of Mercury. It sounds like a myth that got dressed for a formal dinner. Mercury is a metal that flows like a cat in a new house, sliding along surfaces and refusing to be held. It also evaporates, invisibly persuasive, and prefers not to be amongst. The old historian who recorded the tomb's design noted the rivers as a detail, the way a catalog notes a pleasant extra feature. With bronze birds and lacquered balustrades, one can almost hear him add, and the famous waterways. Modern readers tilted their heads. Could they have really poured a metallic map under a hill? The ancient court knew Mercury. They called it quicksilver and used it in medicines, cosmetics, and experiments that the modern safety officer would prefer not to attend. Mines existed, particularly in the south, where cinnabar ore glowed a dignified red. In small bowls at court, the quick metal could mirror a face, although it is fair to say the mirror did not return compliments. People eventually walked around the mound with instruments that looked like backpacks with opinions. They measured the soil's breath and listened to the magnetic grumble of what might be walls. One team reported unusual levels of mercury in the area, a kind of metallic whisper rising from the ground, gently enough to make you wonder if the hill was exhaling history. Others pointed out that modern pollution can be sneaky, and that a highway does not always keep to its lane, even underground. The conversation became a very polite game of could be, might be, and let's not stand too close. A scientist explained that to know for sure, one would need to drill. An archaeologist explained that to drill would be to say goodbye to the promise we keep with sealed rooms. And so the hill kept both the rumor and the courtesy. It is a curious human thing to take the sky and bring it indoors. The texts mention a ceiling painted with constellations, a planetarium for one, so that even underground the emperor would not be behind on the stars. You can picture artisans plotting the Milky Way in dots of mica and pearl, waiting on ladders, trying not to drip paint on the royal horizon. Below, a map of the empire might have sat like a calm cake, with rivers meandering in channels of bronze and mercury like candle wax. There is something domestically amusing about this. The most powerful person in the region commissioning what is essentially a custom coffee table devoted to geography. You can imagine him, after a difficult day of standardizing currency and axle widths, resting a hand above the little yellow river, thinking about the real one that bent mountains to its schedule. The sky below idea also shows the cheerful ambition of the project. If you could map the heavens in lacquer, then perhaps your work on Earth would be equally tidy. The Emperor's government liked standard units. They selected characters for writing that everyone could agree on, because the Empire had decided to be readable. They set gauge to roads the way we set gauge to train tracks, a width so that carts could move like sentences across a long page. The tomb's rivers would therefore not be purely decorative, more like a final audit. Are the channels straight where they should be, winding where they must be, present where they are required? It is a bureaucrat's poetry, dry in a dignified way. One can almost sense a clerk in the corner checking the longitude of Orion with a brush. When you reach the part about mechanisms, the story slows until it hardly moves at all, which is exactly what the mechanisms want. The hill is not so much guarded by weapons as by design. Imagine a gallery of wooden systems whose only purpose is to choose not to behave in your presence. A door that refuses to remember how to hinge, a latch that finds you personally unpersuasive, a stair that ends because the plan says it ends, and surely you have another appointment. Some old chronicles mention crossbows. Whether they are still tense after 20 centuries is a question reserved for those who enjoy being the first to know and the last to relax. Modern engineers who whisper about conservation point out a different trap. Vacuum-sealed air that has been sitting with priceless pigment for 2 millennia, waiting for the first draft to begin a chemistry lesson. The last lock is not metal. It is intention. There is a corridor that bends slightly. If the estimates are right, a thoughtful detour inserted to confuse a hypothetical thief with a poor sense of patience. In this imagined passage, we meet the gatekeepers of the present day, the archivists who say, with the politeness of saints at a train station, not yet. Their office chairs are modern, but their work is old, to choose between curiosity and care, again and again, and to write the word later on grant applications without bitterness. Every decade, the tools improve. Resistivity mapping learns a new synonym for a lump. Drones become modest. Archaeology turns into a sort of medicine practiced entirely by listening. The not yet becomes less of a refusal and more of a lullaby. An lullaby is a lesson the ancient planners would have understood. Some projects require centuries to complete, and among these projects is the simple act of waiting. The hill receives scientists the way an elderly relative receives visitors, with affection and with the quiet suggestion that you might like a blanket. They arrive with magnetometers, ground-penetrating radar, spectrometers, multimeters, and a thermos full of tea. Measurements are taken. Numbers nod approvingly at other numbers. An intern holds a cable exactly as instructed, feeling the weight of the day pass through it. A researcher points to a graph where the line has decided to be interesting. The team agrees to ask it very gently why. Every so often a report says the word anomaly, which is science's way of saying maybe. This is good for the imagination and even better for bedtime. Anomaly is a very soft pillow. As they listen, they also think about caves painted in pigment that flakes at a hint of air, scrolls that oxidize, textiles that vanish like the content of a dream once the eyes open. The first emperor's chamber, if it looks anything like the descriptions, might be the ultimate version of the problem. Exquisite surfaces waiting in conditions that have not changed since the last lamp went out. Opening the doors could be like taking a cake out of a sealed oven and discovering it is made of fog. Conservators prefer to develop a plan that would carry the room into the present at the pace of a walk, not the pace of a sprint. They consider robots the way gardeners consider shears, useful, but the plant must be ready. The hill, if it could speak, would advise a weather report and a cup of water. What of the mercury itself? In small quantities, sealed, it behaves like a very dramatic bead. In a channel, under a roof of lacquer, it might have muttered quietly for centuries, losing some of itself to vapor and exchanging other parts with the soil. If it is there, it is changing even while refusing to be obvious. People sometimes point to a famous experiment. Heat mercury and it seems to vanish. Leave it to cool and the metal returns, as if it had only stepped out for a moment. 17th century Europeans considered this delightful. Earlier Chinese alchemists had their own recipes and their own cautions. One more modern reason to wait is simply courtesy to the workers of long ago. Their experiment with permanence is still running. It would be a shame to interrupt the test just before the results arrive. In the meantime, the terracotta soldiers stand in their separate halls nearby, continuing the most orderly parade in history. They are not in the hill, but they belong to its long sentence. Each figure's face was finished by a hand that got to know noses very well indeed. Their armor is a catalog of fasteners. Their top knots could star in a tutorial for patient hair. Where paints have survived, they are bold in a way that feels cheerfully modern. Where the paints have fled, conservationists nod and design better ways to invite color to stay. Visitors drift among them with the slow respect one also sees in supermarkets near the tea aisle, where the labels ask for quiet decisions. The soldiers have their own stories kill codes, stamped onto Solace fingerprints that refuse to apologize. An assembly line that behaved like artistry on purpose, but even they glance toward the hill as if to say the main text is still sealed. Scholars argue gently about phrases in the old history. Did rivers mean literal channels or something more poetic? Was the map metaphor or hardware? The author wrote a century after the burial using sources now lost, which makes him the friend who saved all the photos to an album we can no longer find. He also mentions devices for protection that make modern readers clutch their guidebooks, and artisans trapped as guardians, a detail that makes the jaws of ethics committees very tight. The mixture of engineering and myth is part of the charm. The document is halfway between a blueprint and a bedtime story, and we have been reading it by lamplight ever since. Every few years, a rumor floats across the news like a gull. Someone proposes a new scan, or suggests a gentle probe, or claims that the hill has shifted by a whisper. The custodians respond with a plan to study the best way to study, which is a very scholarly way of saying, we brought tea and we will be here a while. The longer the hill waits, the more skill we develop for meeting it at eye level. Ancient lacquer that would have powdered in a day may now be strolled into the present over months. Structures that would have sighed into dust might be coaxed, like shy animals, into tolerating light. The archivist not yet becomes a curious, hopeful, maybe soon, but properly. In the meantime, the river rumor makes a good companion for a walk. You can stand at the edge of the lawn and picture it, a slow line glimmering in candlelight beneath your shoes, a map that does not care for directions to restaurants, only deltas and bends. It is entirely possible, of course, that when the hill finally allows visitors, the Mercury will be present only in traces, pulled like handfuls of moonlight in corners. The channels might turn out to be bronze-painted gullies or something more interesting but less shiny. There might be no crossbows-only latches that creak with the relief of a long job completed. The ceiling might be painted with a different cosmology than we expect, perhaps a pattern entirely practical, like a schedule of stars used by farmers. None of this would be disappointing. The Emperor's project was never about satisfying a future audience. It was about arranging a private world with exactness. The quiet if is part of the design. He built a forever room. We build a forever curiosity. So we listen. Ground-penetrating radar hums to itself. Magnetometers sweep like careful brooms. A graduate student compares data from a winter morning to data from a summer evening and learns that soil, like people, has moods. The team writes a report that concludes with the phrase, "Further study required," a sentence that performs the surprisingly restful function of a lullaby. The hill rests under cypress and sparrow, and trucks cruise along the highway nearby with radios low. It is almost dawn again. Somewhere a gardener stretches, drinks from a thermos, and checks the spray of the sprinkler. He looks up at the mound the way one looks at a clock that never advertises the hour and understands that some instruments do not tell time, they make it. Before you fall asleep, or after you have, consider one last hypothesis, soft as quilt batting. Suppose the rivers are there, silver and still. Suppose the hierarchies of chambers are exactly measured, the ceiling stars exactly copied from a night that no longer exists. Suppose also that opening it would let the modern world rush in like an impatient tour group, and that colors rehearsed in darkness would faint. and that the air would feel too busy for a room intended for one quiet emperor who disliked drafts. In that case, the most faithful reading of the plan is to remain on the grass, to say a small respectful sentence to the skylights of the cypress, and to leave the river to its silence. The chronicles can keep the footnote, the instruments can keep their patient arguments, the hill can keep breathing. You may at this point have drifted into a nap, which is exactly the correct response to a tomb designed to outweigh all visitors. If you are still awake, you can subscribe, or you can decide not to, and either choice will fit neatly into the long pause between the hill's first shovelful and its eventual whisper of a door. The old historian will stay on his shelf, the modern archivist will label a folder next season, and the Mercury, if Mercury there is, will roll its tiny shoulders and continue to be liquid in the dark. The night is lacquered. The distances are counted by pearls instead of miles. Somewhere above the hill, the Milky Way carries on with its obligations, and somewhere below it, the map dreams without needing to be read. And we leave this story exactly as we find it, unraveled only by quiet, wrapped again by quiet, a world that continues privately while the listener drifts away. You might not expect a rectangle of sheet metal with a drawer to have changed how governments breathe, but the filing cabinet did exactly that quietly, with rollers, and in a color best described as office desk. It looks so unassuming that your eyelids may already be relaxing, which is the correct response to an object whose only ambition is to remain at right angles. Before the cabinet, paper sprawled across desks like migrating geese, stacking into folios tied with ribbons, stored in pigeonholes that taught dust how to settle with confidence. A clerk reached for one bundle and dislodged 3, a kind of stationary avalanche. After the cabinet, pages learned to stand politely. They were given folders like soft jackets, labeled tabs like meme badges at a very sleepy conference, and they slid into rails that clicked with the punctuation of certainty. If you're still awake by the time we discuss the evolution of the hanging folder hook, feel free to subscribe, though honestly, the cabinet will keep filing you gently under peaceful either way. The cabinet arrived in the late 19th century with the unshowy force of a standard. Vertical filing paper upright, like books, was championed by office supply firms whose catalog prose was so calm it deserved a nap. They offered wooden cases at first because the world trusted trees, and then steel, because the world learned to trust paint. A drawer became a habitat, far walls, a bottom, and a willingness to extend and retract without melodrama. The handles were often recessed so as not to catch the sleeve of a patient clerk. Drawers learned to ride on smooth slides, sometimes equipped with stoppers that promised never to let the whole drawer leap out unexpectedly, as if it had somewhere better to be. The great virtue of the cabinet was not capacity but sequence. Paper could line up in an order that felt natural to the human alphabet and to the human day, A after B after C, invoice after invoice, year after year, the way rain follows weather reports. Folders were the next refinement. Manila, which is not a city in this sentence, but a fiber from abaca plants that behave like paper with sturdy manners. Each folder was a small room for a set of pages that belonged together, letters with their replies, reports with their charts, maps with their accusations against the compass. Tabs appeared, shy at first and then bolder, placed left, center, or right according to secret office philosophies. The tab invited a label. The label invited a typewriter to choose a font that did not care for opinions. There was a smell in those rooms, paper, metal, a trace of carbon ribbon that meant things were being kept, which is a calmer verb than done. The cabinet dignified trivia. A receipt for 6 pencils in 1912 earned a folder, a label, a position in the drawer, and the drawer entered the archive with the slow satisfaction of a door closing correctly. The defense against chaos became mechanical. Rails hugged the folders. Studs secured the rails. Folders resisted the ancestral urge to curl. Hanging folders evolved as an intervention. Little hooks rested on lateral bars like birds settling on telephone wires, each bird wearing a tiny plastic beak that announced QR or labor, 1938. The hooks were devices of unexpected tenderness. If you looked closely, you saw the stamped angle that allowed them to glide without catching. If you listened closely, you heard the faint syllable order as metal touched metal. Tabs moved along a clear track and snapped into the place where your brain felt least tired reading them. There were inside folders that nested like quiet ideas and out guide stiff markers that said, in office Latin, "Something used to be here, and will be again." The cabinet did not merely store. It narrated absence with compassion. Then came the war on paper curl. Paper, like a cat on a sunny shelf, wants to do as it pleases. Humidity persuades pages to sip the air and swell. Dryness asks them to sharpen into brittle chips. Filing cabinets learn to behave like microclimates. Some offices tucked desiccants in the back, little sachets that looked like tea bags with trust issues. Others specified steel gauge and drawer fit so precise that drafts couldn't get a word in. In museums, where paper is treated like an elderly relative with a lively past, cabinets became archival grade, powder-coated, gasket-lipped, and accompanied by hygrometers that spoke in numbers. The rails themselves developed polite tolerances. If they were too tight, folders groaned. Too loose, and folders slouched like bored teenagers. The sweet spot produced the classical glide, the sound of a culture agreeing that ninths of an inch deserved a committee. Public administrations discovered that the cabinet could be a government in miniature. Tax forms in one bank, maps in another. Birth records meeting death records with a respectful aisle between. City halls became quiet forests of cabinets, each drawer a tree ring of legislation. During the rise of civil service exams and the standardization of bureaucracy, cabinets multiplied like chessboards. Offices specified dimensions in polite memos, letter size for domestic paper, legal size for the long thoughts of lawyers, fool's cap for the traditions that refused to be modernized until they were. An observer in 1910 could stand in the middle of a planning department and hear the soundscape of governance, the click as a drawer locked, the sigh as another slid home, the whisper of a folder being consulted like a book that did not mind being interrupted mid-sentence. The cabinet, like a diligent civil servant, had excellent posture and kept its opinions on the inside. Meanwhile, libraries cultivated the cabinet's cousin, the card catalog. Here the drawers were shallow and many, balanced to accept a flock of cards so numerous and so similar that they might as well have been snow. The rods through the card bottoms kept the blizzard from escaping. Librarians developed a touch so gentle that cards obeyed alphabetical order without feeling policed. The cabinet gave the library a heartbeat, a soft rhythm of open, pause, slide, close. Every title card was a passport. Every subject card was an embassy. And somewhere in the back sat the blank cards, waiting with the patience of good paper. People like to recall the smell of old books, but the card catalog had an aroma all its own: oak, paste, foxed edges, a hint of pencil, but announced information ready to meet you halfway. The cabinet also learned to travel. Lightweight models appeared for field offices, with handles and brave claims about damp resistance. Architects carried flat files that looked like coffee tables with secrets, where drawings napped under sheets of weight. Natural history museums slid herbaria into cabinets that sealed against the diets of insects. War departments during 2 wars filled cabinets with forms that knew more about logistics than any one colonel could remember, then trudged those cabinets onto ships, then into depots, each drawer a little theater of supply. A clerk somewhere in a tent in Italy or a prefab office in Kansas wrote with a fountain pen on a label, spare axle pins, and committed a tiny act of civilization. The cabinet rewards such acts with a lifetime of readability. At some point, the cabinet and the typewriter agreed to be friends. Labels became standardized slips, then self-adhesive rectangles that promised bravely to stick forever. Fonts marched onto tabs with a sense of destiny. There were etiquette books for offices that specified whether one should write MC before Mac or after, how to treat hyphens, what to do with numerals that insisted on arriving at the front of a word. Businesses argued gently about color coding, green for finance in one firm, blue in another, rebel splashes of red in the legal department when adrenaline was otherwise in short supply. There were debates about whether to put people's first names before their last. The cabinet did not mind, so long as the clerk stayed consistent. Consistency is the filing cabinet's lullaby. Microfilm briefly announced itself like a futuristic cousin arriving with a projector. For a generation or two, offices turned pages into tiny photographic ghosts and stored the reels in boxes that looked like the very small hats of very serious people. Cabinets adapted, offering drawers for spools and trays for readers. It made sense. A newspaper archive that would have filled a room now fit into a cabinet that fit into a corner that fit into a budget. But the cabinets were not jealous. They held the index to the microfilm, which meant they still knew where everything was. And the film, like an enthusiastic intern, eventually asked the cabinet for advice. Then computers began humming softly on desks, and the cabinet was reassured to see that the first metaphors chosen for digital order were its own. We saved files in folders, placed those folders inside other folders, and arranged them in virtual drawers with names so soothing they could be paint colors. My documents, archive, MISC. The screen offered icons shaped like manila jackets and little tabs. Even trash looked like a Bena clerk might wheel away. The network was a very large cabinet, heated, cooled, invisible, and the cabinet, which has seen fads come and go, refrained from comment. In most offices, metal drawers kept working alongside servers. The two systems like neighbors who wave from their porches and agree about the weather. There is a sweetness to the cabinet's patience. It accepts corrections at the speed of tape and erasers. A misfiled folder is not a disaster, but a treasure hunt that ends, more or less, exactly where it should. The cabinet gives you a second chance to remember why you wrote something down in the first place. It has a tilt alarm built into its own physics. Pull out too many drawers at once, and the cabinet leans forward to remind you of gravity and humility. Manufacturers added counterweights and interlock systems so that only one drawer would open at a time, a mechanical form of manners that helped stability and prevented arguments. Manuals explained how to level your cabinet on an uneven floor, using shims that looked like slices of patience. In conservation labs now, restorers talk about cabinets the way gardeners talk about soil. Good cabinets make good archives. They test for off-gassing, the slow exhalation of chemicals from paint and adhesives. They choose powder coatings that do not yellow or offer surprising fragrances. They measure draw gaps with the focus of jewelers. They fit inert, unscented foams and enclosures that reassure quilts and maps that they are safe. When they install a cabinet, they also install routine. A log on the door, a chart of humidity on the wall, a small pencil tied with string. The pencil is important. It will never run out of battery, and the string tells it where home is. The cabinet approves of strings. They are like the rails of the analog world. Museums love flat files the way cats love sunny windowsills. Engineers' drawings, posters for long ago fairs. Atlases with corners that remember snow each gets a drawer and a spacer and a label. The handles are horizontal and smooth. Some handles carry discrete locks with tiny keys that could double as earrings. Curators wear cotton gloves that make turning pages into a quiet sport. There is an entire choreography. Pull, support, lift, sigh. Visitors seldom see this dance, but the objects do, and they relax accordingly. At night, after the gallery lights go out, the building cools and the cabinets continue to do what they do best, hold their breath at a measured rate. The office supply catalogs of the mid-20th century are lullabies and paragraphs. 4-drawer vertical filing cabinet in olive drab or beige, they say, colors that imply the tactical diplomacy of wallpaper. Ball bearing slides for smooth action, label holders accept. 2-inch by 1-inch tags, equipped with follower blocks. Follower blocks sit at the rear of a drawer. They press against the last folder like a hand on a shoulder and keep the papers true. It is an affectionate feature. Some have spring tension that can be adjusted with a small coin. The coin in question, depending on the country, leaves a circular signature you can discover later, a soft palimpsest of office improvisation. The paperclip deserves a nod here, although it is more of a brochure than a cabinet. Early designs had Gothic aspirations. Later designs surrendered to the elegant oval familiar to pockets worldwide. The clip's partnership with the cabinet is one of mutual modesty. The clip arranges conversation inside the folder. The folder arranges conversation inside the drawer. The drawer arranges conversation inside the room. Together, they produce a society of near silence. Staplers, those square-shouldered cousins, add percussion. There were even staple extractors shaped like small reptiles. They open their jaws and reverse decisions with approval. None of this needs to be exciting to be perfect. Postal services wrote to cabinets. A letter left a desk in a perfect shape and sought a drawer across the city, bearing recommendations from drawers it had met on the way sorting cases, pigeonholes, bags labeled with the names of fairies. When the letter arrived and became a file, the cabinet met it like a host who always has a clean glass. Files swelled as correspondence accumulated, then shrank during spring cleanings that were themselves documented and filed. Boxes retired drawers to offsite storage. Drawers retained indices that referenced those boxes. This gentle recursion, a cabinet referring to a box, referring to a file, referring back to a drawer, could go on for years. The way lullabies often repeat verses you don't strictly need. Sociologists sometimes suggest that the cabinet changed the shape of memory. An organization could remember through paper even when the people changed desks, moved cities, learned new chair heights. The cabinet became continuity. Its locks were small, easily picked by a key you kept in a cup on the same cabinet, which says something tender about trust. Of course, there were safes for things that insisted on drama, but the majority of reality fit comfortably behind a standard handle. When offices relocated, moving trucks filled with cabinets formed convoys of stability. Metal drawers hummed in the breeze. Labels fluttered like flags that believed in fonts. You may be curious about disasters. Cabinets have a surprisingly good record in floods, provided the water doesn't climb too high. In basements after storms, people have opened drawers to find the top layers dry and the bottom layers baptized into a future with blotting paper and fans. Fire is less forgiving. Heat flexes steel, drawers warp, labels crisp into a browner philosophy. As a result, disaster plans include sentences like elevate cabinets on 2-inch platforms and avoid storage below water lines. Prose so practical it could tuck you in at night. The cabinet accepts such plans with stoicism. It has never pretended to be an ark. Today, as offices dim and servers brighten, cabinets remain in schools, town halls, studios, and attics. They hold sheet music for choirs that meet on Thursdays. They protect genealogies that spell the same name 3 ways with equal affection. They babysit the negatives of photographs that remember a century more accurately than most anniversaries. Artists adopt them, paint them cheerful colors, and file sketches that will one day be called early. Mechanics keep parts diagrams that smell slightly of oil and satisfaction. The world's digital cloud covers the sky. The cabinet shares the weather. There is, I think, a special sleepiness in the act of closing a drawer. Your hand feels the last inch when gravity and design agree to finish the job without you. The cabinet completes the gesture like a librarian placing a book back into the exact silence it enjoyed earlier. Somewhere a tiny still ball finds its notch and stays. The label remains legible. The folder waits. The rails are content. If you return tomorrow, the cabinet will not pretend any time has elapsed. It will accept your hand and offer you the same folder with the same measured enthusiasm. Consistency, again, is the cabinet's lullaby. If you are still listening, we can visit a last detail: keyways. Many cabinets share the same key number, stamped tidily on a little brass circle. A single key, then, might open 100 drawers in a building, which is either a security concern or a vote of confidence in the people who live with paper. Keys live on braided chains attached to rubber fobs the shape of whispered promises. When a key is lost, the cabinet is patient. It accepts a new cylinder like a watch accepts a fresh spring. Old locks, stored in a paper bag in a drawer in the same cabinet, continue to exist as history contained inside history, a fold within a fold. As the day ends, the office grows as quiet as a museum after hours. Lights recede, screens extinguish themselves with small goodbyes, and the cabinets, which have been practicing stillness since delivery, resume their preferred state. A cleaning cart hums by. A feather duster performs a kind of secular blessing. Somewhere a drawer isn't quite flush. Someone walks back, presses it gently, listens for the soft engagement of the catch, nods, and goes home. The cabinet keeps its place with the poise of furniture that knows it is also infrastructure. And if, during the night, a page inside a folder relaxes back to flatness, it does so at a pace no clock can detect. So we end where we began, with a rectangle of metal and a drawer that decides to glide. The filing cabinet solved the old problem of paper in the same way sleep solves the old problem of being awake, by arranging things so they don't need attention right now. It is not heroic. It does not try for applause. It cultivates the modest thrill of retrieval and the deep, slow relief of, we know where that is. If you're still awake, you can subscribe, or simply label this moment rest and file it under a letter that means something to you. The cabinet will be here either way, rails aligned, clips composed, tabs legible, a small empire of order that whispers, almost inaudibly, that everything is already where it needs to be. You might not expect a buried hill to contain a rumor about moving metal, or that a rumor could be patient for 2,000 years. But that is the kind of rumor we're dealing with tonight. The hill looks simple, like a half-finished thought in earth, and the pines make a sound that belongs to weather and not to history. Somewhere inside, the story says, a city sleeps in lacquer and bronze, and somewhere deeper still, there are rivers that are not water. They are Mercury, which is already a sleepy word, round in the mouth, slow in the tray, silver like moonlight that forgot to be light. If you find yourself still awake several drawers from now, you can subscribe, or simply nod once in the dark to register your attendance. Either is fine, and the hill will not take offense. We begin at ground level, with the seal that keeps everything exactly where it prefers to be, untouched, undecided, and remarkably well organized. The builders mounded the earth with the reassuring logic of agricultural laborers who had learned a new hobby. A platform, a retaining wall, another layer, tamped and tamped again. The slope is deliberate and the angles believe in themselves. At the base, bricks meet soil in a long handshake. Above, the cypress groves work the same shift every day, combing the wind with needles, adding a new ring to their quiet diaries. If you were to walk around the hill at dawn, you would find nothing dramatic, only the pleasing geometry of statcraft pretending to be landscaping. In the text that survived, the emperor refuses to end, which is to say he chooses a version of presence that does not require movement. He is painted into the center of a closed system, palaces arranged like sentences, chambers like commas, all of it sealed under a dome of patient dirt. The workmanship insists on a kind of indoor eternity. The lacquer that coats the walls is confident without being loud. The pigments still consider themselves employed. The corridors were measured with a concept of time that did not need a clock. You can imagine a workshop where a carpenter counts the hours by the length of a shadow across a plank, then lays that plank precisely, and the plank continues counting even after the man goes home. Every culture creates a form of caution that looks like an art. In this case, the art is the seal. It is not wax, but strategy, a combination of backfilled passages, hidden thresholds, and decisions written in clay. The people responsible for the last doorway must have worked in whispers, carrying baskets of earth that swallowed their own footprints. One of them would have known the last stone to be set, the one that turned an interior into a sentence with a period. The texts hint at traps, but traps are often just rumors and helmets. The more reliable story is patience, ramps dismantled after use, ventilation disguised as geology, the entrances encouraged to forget themselves. A good seal does not glare, it hums. The palace inside is allowed to continue, but privately. There is a ceremony to leaving a door closed and calling it an act of respect. The modern world, which is very good at opening things, recognizes that ceremony and tries to stand very still, like a visitor who has arrived early to a museum and is waiting for the guard to turn the key. People will always want to look in. That is a scientific instinct and also a human one, and sometimes, late at night, the two agree to share a blanket. The first reports of Mercury under the hill came from lines in a chronicle, where the writer, with the confidence of someone who has seen a metal bead chase itself across a plate, mentions waterways that glitter in darkness. This is the kind of sentence that causes survey teams to polish their devices. Over time, instruments have learned to listen to Earth the way you listen to an old friend on a bad phone line. Magnetometers mutter, resistivity meters sketch. Ground-penetrating radar speaks in cross-sections that look like pastry diagrams. You carry a screen across a field, and it replies with layers. In one set of scans, channels appear where channels should not, quiet signatures shaped like streams that forgot how to dry. The skeptical mind, which is a polite neighbor to the curious one, reminds us of pipes, burrows, roots, and the athletic lives of tree stumps. But the rumor of Mercury does not mind skepticism. It glides around it like a bead avoiding a fingertip. To imagine those rivers, you have to reframe water. Mercury does not wet in the ordinary sense. It congregates. It plays at being liquid while staying slightly aloof. If you spill it, it becomes a galaxy of spheres, each with a crisp opinion about surface tension. A small lamp can persuade it to act like a mirror that forgot to lie flat. In a tomb, as a metaphor or a plan, Mercury becomes a geography of control. Architects of ritual enjoy miniature worlds. They enjoy canals that obey, lakes that do not evaporate during speeches, and streams that hold their shape in dim torchlight like lines on a map that nod back. The idea of an underworld city crossed by a metal water is the sort of detail that makes an empire feel organized even in silence. Imagine a boat the size of a loaf, painted red like a confident sentence, riding on a current that could polish a coin by looking at it. The courtiers of the afterlife never doze, but they move slowly and consider that a different thing. Above this imagined water is a sky that does not behave like a sky. The ceiling of the chamber is rippled and studded, a lacquered astronomy that may have once been bright enough to brief a myth. People like to place their heavens indoors for safekeeping. If you cannot keep the stars from wandering, you can at least give them a domestic address on a ceiling. In some rooms of the ancient world, the constellations were painted like inventory, with each bright point a promise that somewhere outside the roof was repeating itself in a kinder scale. A star, a seal, and a schedule. This is how you keep eternity on time. Later visitors with flashlights, centuries later if they ever arrive, would see the same ceiling and feel the same compression, a sky lowered to a comfortable height and punctuated by pearls that used to be brighter. A reversed firmament has the same calming quality as a library classification system. If the real heavens are rowdy, the lacquer skies are punctual. Each bead stays where it has been told to stay, which is a model of government disguised as decoration. To hold such things at arm's length requires mechanisms, and the Hill is generous in gossip about them. Most of the rumored defenses are really just logistics made romantic. You can imagine ramps that collapse with dignity after the last wagon passes, doors that close like a thoughtfully assembled box, and passages that end in the pleasing honesty of a wall. The engineering is accumulative rather than theatrical. Bricks, rammed earth, timber that behaves like apology. The clockwork here is not a trap with teeth. It is caution arranged in layers, a bureaucracy of materials. A corridor might turn 3 times because 3 seems more official than 2. A staircase might stop 6 steps early because the diagram says so. Time itself becomes a mechanism when you count it with soil. The last lock is intention, and intention is the one material that does not rot. Modern gatekeepers speak quietly and write better memos than the ancients. Archaeologists, conservators, local officials, each keeps a small key ring of responsibilities. They say not yet in a tone that implies not never. They use the language of temperature and humidity, of chemical stability, of the reversible intervention. Every decade sharpens the tools without sharpening the appetite. Ethics committees now do what piles of soil used to do. They slow us down and demand more light. A grant application might read like an inventory of patience. There are budgets for not opening a door. There are training sessions in leaving a wall alone. Even the cameras practice restraint, switching to wavelengths that favor modesty. You might picture a circle of archivists around a table, each with a pencil, each pencil tied to its own notebook with a loop of string, all of them discussing how to reduce curiosity to a manageable hum. The most beautiful part of the modern approach is how much listening we can do without adding verbs like pry, chip, scrape, or insert. Drones roll softly over the mound, mapping it in topographic size. Radar stitches the subsurface into quilts of likelihood. Soil cores rise in narrow columns, smell faintly of history and rain, and return to their homes in labeled sleeves. Laboratories test grains like astronomers test light, looking for traces of cinnabar, silt, or human intention. Somewhere a spreadsheet enters numbers that feel a bit like weather, and a graph answers with a curve that looks, to the ardent eye, like a river negotiating with a wall. We have learned to accept that possible is a complete sentence. It is a good bedtime word. It tucks itself in and does not ask for a drink of water. What if we found Mercury actual, confirmable beneath the hill? The consequence would be an argument disguised as careful voices. Some would say open a small window, just large enough to meet the evidence in person, and then close it again as if it were a hatch on a quiet boat. Others would advocate for heroic patience, citing the oxygen that waits like a ruin in the making. Mercury, after all, prefers tidy arrangements and reacts poorly to drafts. If you released 1,000 years of stillness too quickly, you might watch a miniaturized river develop indie tendencies. Conservators imagine vaults within vaults, negative pressure rooms that teach air to behave, robots that accept brief internships underground. Skeptics remind us, hopefully, that every instrument has an ego and that data loves a misinterpretation the way a cat loves a box. But the hill, as always, is in no hurry to clarify. There's also the softer question, the one that goes well with sleep. How much knowing is enough? Cultures often practice respectful ignorance, a policy that files certain answers under "not now" for centuries. The unopened tomb becomes a lighthouse made of dirt, signaling with absence. It changes the way cities around it are built, the way museums write labels. The way school children tilt their heads when a guide says the word emperor and lets it hang for a moment like incense. Tourism brochures attempt sentences like best viewed from a respectful distance, and the hill cooperates by being excellent at distance. The roads nearby learn to curve. Farmers learn where not to turn the plow. Birds alter their routes by a few wing beats. A rumor, handled properly, modifies a landscape in perpetuity without raising its voice. Sometimes the rumors attract other rumors. There are stories of mechanical crossbows waiting in the dark, clearly bored by now, but still professionally exact, or of pearls that light when a clever wick is coaxed into submission. These are the darlings of footnotes and good for keeping teenagers awake on a bus. The kinder possibility, and surely the more likely, is a chamber that protects itself with nothing more than time and administrative competence. Traps require maintenance, and maintenance is a form of opening. The strongest lock in a tomb is a perfect rationale for not visiting, written clearly and filed in the minds of those who would otherwise request a tour. If someone insists on excitement, the ground will offer them a survey permit and a contour map printed at a respectful scale. That usually does the trick. We return to listening because it is both modern and ancient. The instruments loop around the hill like swallows, reading small changes in the electric gossip of the soil. When the air is dry, the echoes carry differently. When it is wet, the hill becomes a little more generous. The screens in the field tents show slices of the invisible. They look like the edges of cakes that have been very carefully cut. A technician points at a feature and says this might be a void, which in archaeology is a compliment. Another points at a signature and says that looks like stone pretending to be water. There is a pause while everyone imagines Mercury behaving itself for 20 centuries, wearing a hat of dirt and a coat of myth. The pause is the best part. You can fit a nap inside it. If the maps are persuasive and the numbers courteous, a hypothesis begins to knit itself. The hill contains a model of an empire, palaces for memory, gardens for philosophy, and rivers for authority. The rivers are Mercury, because that metal makes a better promise than water. It will not evaporate in the middle of a ceremony. It will not foster algae if the chorus is late. It holds a mirror to the ceiling stars so that heaven and earth can nod to each other across an aisle. Whether this model exists precisely as spoken is, in the practical sense, less important than the way it arranges our patience. The hill asks us to practice a slow curiosity, to let instruments ask their questions while hands remember how to be undecided. It suggests that certainty is sometimes a form of heat, and heat is not always welcome. At night, the wind goes on writing its calm minutes in the pines. The grass resets its posture. A guard with a thermos makes a familiar lap at a speed that matches the slope. He knows the shades of the hill in the moonlight pewter, then tin, then a gray that has never learned the word Mercury and doesn't need to. In a trailer not far away, a display blinks over to a new line of data and then stays there with the patience of lacquer. Lightning bugs make their own minor cartography. If you fall asleep just here, with the rumor still politely unexplained, you will miss nothing urgent. The emperor, who would not end, continues not ending with admirable restraint. The tomb, which nobody opens, continues to be a lesson on how to leave a door alone. The instruments will listen a little longer. The stars on the painted ceiling will continue to hold their assigned positions, whether anyone is counting or not. And somewhere, perhaps, a metal river turns itself over like a drowsy idea, and goes still again, keeping its mirror polished against the day it might be asked, gently to show its face. You might not expect a hill of tamped earth to hum with rumors about liquid metal, the way a kettle begins to sing before it quite boils, but that is the sound people swear they hear if they stand on the leeward side at dusk and listen with their polite attention turned up. The hill looks practical, like a project completed on time and under budget, and the pines around it are the kind that write the same sentence in needles every day. Somewhere inside, there is said to be an emperor who decided not to end, only to relocate, choosing a quieter address with better insulation. Somewhere deeper, there may be waterways that shine without asking the moon for help. If by the time I get to the part about the sky being installed under a roof, you are still awake, you may subscribe, or simply nod once as if signing for a package in your sleep. I won't know the hell won't care, and the rumor will continue its exercise routine either way. It helps to let the surface do its work first. The mound is careful rather than grand. It holds its slope the way a veteran librarian holds a pencil, with a small, enforceable dignity. The retaining walls are more about manners than about force. The soil rests in compacted layers that feel like calendars, each tamped day agreeing to carry the next. Walk the circumference and you meet the same logic again and again, angles believing in themselves, drainage choosing the boring path, bricks finding one another like colleagues who have rehearsed the greeting. It is not a hill that wants applause. It wants you to notice the way a path softly corrects your stride, how a ditch remembers a storm so you don't have to. The structure is a decision extended over distance. If you stand by the eastern trees at first light, you can almost hear carpenters finishing a sentence that started 2 millennia ago. Inside, or so the old texts insist with the confident handwriting of people who love certainty, lies a city arranged to survive weather that never changes. Paint was asked to remain employed, and it has, at least in principle. Lacquer learned what patience feels like, and then it taught the walls. Corridors were paced into existence by men who counted time and the length of footsteps, and then forgot to stop counting. It is the kind of interior where a throne can be more comfortable than a bed, because nobody is expected to sleep. When the last craftsman left, the rooms kept breathing at a smaller scale. Even silence has a workforce when you design it carefully enough. You imagine bundles of brushwood carried out at dusk, a final nail pressed level with a thumb, a foreman putting away a string line as if you were shelving a poem. The door was closed in the same way a ledger is closed, with a column that adds up. The decision not to open that door grew muscular with time. It is not a refusal anymore so much as a profession. The storybooks mention lethal crossbows ready to argue with strangers, which is one way to generate respect, but the sturdier defense has been administrative. Earth has been trained in patience. It holds position like a well-briefed guard. Ramps were dismantled so thoroughly that they have graduated into rumor. Shafts were backfilled with the modest carry reserved for delicate eggs. Ventilation was disguised as geology. Every entrance forgot its name. A seal should not flex its muscles where anyone can see, and this one does not. It expresses itself in policies. People still come to look, and the hill's answer is always the same. A kind consensus that says, the world can continue, but privately. Beneath the policy, there floats the more glamorous whisper of the metal rivers. Mercury is such a sleepy word that it sounds tired while being spoken, and yet it has the confidence of a mirror that knows it can keep a secret. The chronicle tells us the streams inside were set to flow along channels the way a sentence flows between punctuation marks, and that they glowed when fire made the room think of daytime. It is an indoor geography, the sort that pleases rulers because it behaves. Water argues, evaporates, invites algae, and holds meetings with gravity. Mercury assembles, balances itself on bright rules, and wears light like jewelry. In the imagination, it becomes a canal system for statcraft, a network that will not wander during speeches. If a small lacquered thoat, painted the red of a confident decree, ever slid upon it, I hope it made the soft, ridiculous sound that metal makes when it pretends to be water. Directly above those imagined channels is the ceiling that tread on the night. The ancient habit of bringing the sky indoors was partly decorative and partly managerial. A roof studded with images of stars is a comfortable compromise. Heaven, but punctual. Pearls become stars that never drift. Pigment becomes darkness that will not leak. and constellations accept their assignments like clerks at a long desk. The result is a planetarium for one, a vault of authority that agrees to shine when the wick is kind. I like to think the painted Milky Way remembered to curve gently toward the throne, the way a river bends toward a city with good bakeries. If there were comets, they were surely designed to be polite, their tails rendered as well-behaved paragraphs. To keep all this intact required mechanisms that are exciting only to people who appreciate paperwork. The famous traps, if they existed, were probably less dramatic than their publicists. A collapsing staircase that collapses once is a story, not a security system. A rolling stone is impressive until someone oils it. What endures is design that subtracts paths. A corridor that doubles back 3 times, like an official form. A door that can be closed but not opened from pride alone. Slots that accept timbers the way a lock accepts a key, and then accept earth the way a quiet argument finally accepts a shrug. After the last team walked away, the apparatus did what bureaucracy does best. It went to sleep in the correct position and expected everyone else to do the same. The modern gatekeepers are gentler and more talkative. They carry clipboards full of air quality numbers and the very soft power of a well-crafted email. They use phrases like reversible intervention and microclimate stabilization and mean, in the sweetest possible way, do nothing abruptly. Committees meet to compose careful versions of not yet. The phrase is never punched. It is folded. Each decade writes stricter guidelines in the margins. Grants are awarded for learning how not to hurry. The finest specialists can set up a laboratory inside a thought and let it run all winter, testing, for instance, how lacquer remembers humidity or how cinnabar dreams about oxygen. I sometimes imagine a council that meets entirely in whispers out of habit, not necessity, and adjourns when someone boils water for tea. Around the hill the technology purrs. Magnetometers lope like polite dogs, noses down, reading the field's private gossip. Resistivity gear pauses and sends a question into the ground, then waits for an answer in the language of ohms per meter, which is shyer than it sounds. Ground-penetrating radar paints layer cakes on screens in a tent, and people point at one line or another and say things. Like that could be a void, which is an archaeological way of saying we might be very lucky if we remain very patient. Drones drift at the height of careful birds, building a relief model of patience itself. Samples taken from the soil rise in slender cores. They smell of iron, rain, and bureaucracy. 1 or 2 contain flecks of bright promise, which are duly entered into spreadsheets that look, to outsiders, like the minutes of a meeting between dust and statistics. All this listening is a compromise that grows more beautiful the longer it is maintained. We learn to accept a verb like suggest in the same way we accept a lullaby's promise that the barnyard is asleep. It may not be literally true that every animal agreed to at that time, but the rhythm of the song persuades us to rest anyway. The numbers suggest channels. The models suggest architecture that takes moonlight into account even when no moonlight can enter. The historical texts suggest the metal itself flows, or flowed, in defiance of evaporation. A less sleepy program might add urgency here, cut a trench, drop a shaft. Take a look, but this is not that kind of evening, and the hill is not that kind of archive. The most accurate tool we own, for now, is restraint calibrated in decades. There's a small theater of imagination at the center of all this, and everyone gets a seat. The conservative vision shows a sealed city whose air is more concept than atmosphere, the Mercury still gathered like shy planets in their ruts. A more romantic rendering adds tiny vessels cruising through candlelit channels, anonymous attendants checking the angle of a lacquered moon. The skeptical one replaces the rivers with collapsed bracing and the shine with damp meth. Even in that version, the caution is worthwhile. The interesting thing is that each model asks for the same behavior from us. Slow footsteps, careful speech, umbrellas for both rain and enthusiasm. It is a public work in paradox, an ancient construction that continues to improve its surroundings by remaining private. Above ground, the world reheats and cools on schedule. Thus is park with the unthreatening self-importance of geese. Vendors sell things that apologize for not being artifacts. Guides adopt the tempo of bedtime and say phrases that have been polished by many mornings. First Emperor, mausoleum complex, terracotta, sealed chambers, ongoing research. The visitors nod, content to be near a secret that takes kindness to maintain. Children stir the dust with shoes that squeak and discover, perhaps for the first time, that uncertainty can be generous. It lets your imagination pick a seat and then stay for the whole performance. The hill, which has never raised its voice, remains good at distance. Even the wind seems to slow down when it crosses the crown, as if it has been briefed on tone. At night, devices keep watch. Screens show lines that inch toward clarity and then stop out of respect. A guard makes a patient circuit with a thermos that smells faintly of tea and pine resin. The insects publish their own small newspapers in light. Somewhere a technician adjusts the contrast on a cross-section until the interior looks like a stack of blankets. Everyone, human, instrument, Hill seems to agree that doing almost nothing is the most productive strategy available. This, too, is a kind of science, one that measures the rate at which curiosity can be cooled without extinguishing it. If you listen closely, the data makes a sound like a satisfied book closing, and so we drift toward the hypothesis that knows how to tuck itself in. If the rivers are there, they are exact. If they are not, the architecture still teaches the same lesson, which is that precision is a form of kindness to the future. The ceiling will continue to hold its orderly stars, whether Mercury mirrors them or not. The door will continue its career as a door by remaining a wall with dreams. We may decide one day to press farther, to let a camera ride a new tunnel like a cautious fish in quiet water, but even that will be an act of listening with better ears. For now, the best map is a promise, and promises, when kept, are restful. The emperor who would not end continues not ending in a way that does not interrupt anyone's sleep. The sky installed below continues to believe in itself without demanding witnesses. And if there are indeed secret rivers turning lazily in their beds, they will do what sleepy rivers do best. They will make no announcements, polish their own surfaces to a friendly shine, and wait with the patience of a rumor that knows the night is long, and everybody will get the chance to dream. You might not expect a quiet hill outside a provincial city to keep a schedule, but this one does. It holds dawn the way a museum holds Tuesday, evenly, without commentary, as if the sun had taken a number and was being served politely. Close to the crown, the pines make a neat green cuff, and the slope keeps its shape like a well-behaved blanket tucked by someone who did not trust corners. From the road, the mound looks like a small geography that solved itself. No drama, just agreements between soil and gravity signed in pacted layers. Guides point in a mild arc that is part arm, part habit, and say the same tender facts each day, because the classics do not complain about repetition. Somewhere beneath that steadiness lies a residence with no commute, a city that never learned weather, a throne that retired from sitting. When the breeze crosses the slope, it lowers its voice, as if reminded by pine needles to use indoor tones. If you find yourself still awake by the time we get to the part about stars installed under a roof, you can subscribe or follow, or simply promise yourself you will, later after a nap. Promises count here, and I am not in the business of enforcement. Walk the perimeter, and the hill's intentions appear in small gestures. A drainage ditch that looks like nothing in particular is a professional athlete at work. The bricks beneath your feet wear their patience on their rectangular faces. The angle of the slope was chosen by people who trusted the math of hands and tampers. It is strangely soothing to think of them tamping, tamping 1 foot length at a time, their timing more certain than the seasons, their rhythm good for calming a fussy empire. The mound is engineering's quiet voice. It does not boast about load or bearing. It demonstrates. Even the way paths veer around the base feels like a courtesy, as if the hill had put out a sign that says, "Thank you for walking gently," and everyone obeyed because the sign was so polite. Someone once decided this would be an address rather than an event. The decision has held inside, which is to say, inside the imagination that we use carefully when the outside declines to open, lives a plan so coherent that the air is rumored to have adopted its alignment. Corridors run toward chambers as if they were finishing each other's thoughts. Paint learned about humidity, lacquer learned about loyalty, pigments learned about shadow. The floors, if we believe the old artisans describing their own work with suspicious modesty, were burnished until a candle could see itself become two. It is the kind of environment where furniture does not merely sit but assumes office. Even silence, which usually freelances, appears to have been hired. When the last bronze hinge was tested and the last string snapped loose from a bundle of brush, somebody closed the door with more administration than force. It is still closing. The door has tenure. The matter of entry was solved not by heroics, but by forgetting. It is easy to design a trap that shouts. Harder to design a building that makes curiosity lose its keys. Ramps dismantled become topography. Access shafts backfilled become geology. A sealed valve becomes a rumor about a lake of Mercury, then becomes a rumor about a rumor, which is the kind that lasts longest. The old chronicles, whose authors loved a flourish the way cooks love salt, insist there are channels of shining metal inside, obedient as citations. Perhaps, perhaps not. The hill prefers the subjunctive. It is the most comfortable tense for places that mean to endure strangers. So visitors practice the art of being nearly certain. They stand on the path, consider the slope, and find that the most thrilling thing is how little they are needed. Somewhere beneath those compacted seasons, a river that does not wet is said to run. Mercury is a sleeper of a substance. It looks like nothing will happen, and then changes a spoon's mind from silver to gray while you watch. The ancient description calls it a sea, but the word functions more like a shrug that could afford pearls. In the flicker of lamps, that sea would have thrown back a second sky, an edited version with every star showing up for work. Think of a canal inside a room. Think of a channel whose current is not water's anxious hurry, but metal's slow obedience to slope and temperature. Skeptics argue about the physics. Enthusiasts argue about the poetry. Both leave footprints in dust that does not care. The hill allows each party to keep its favorite maybe. Meanwhile, the rumor strolls in circles like a dignified cat and sleeps whenever it wishes, directly above this imagined. Geography is the dome where night was domesticated. A ceiling painted with constellations is a practical miracle, like a calendar that glows. Pearls for stars, because of course the sky would request jewelry, and black lacquer for forever. Even comets, if they were invited, would be rendered as proper paragraphs, long tales carefully proofread. One can picture attendants trimming wicks while a small planetarium acceptably admired itself. Astronomers prefer the genuine night because it answers questions. Rulers prefer the portable version because it obeys. A roof of stars solves both problems when the weather is not taking visitors. The analogy today would be a screensaver that never crashes. If heaven needed IT support, lacquer would have been on the committee. Around the perimeter of this private sky, you expect machines, but the clever part is how many of them are ideas. The stories about lethal crossbows make headlines, but a mechanism that removes ladders is a better guard than a weapon whose springs forget. If a staircase can fold into narrative, it will be retold but not climbed. Doors that close from pride rather than leverage have long careers. A design that roots trespass into boredom is more secure than one that shouts. And so uncertainty tightens bolts that iron cannot reach. The best lock here is intention. It is still engaged. You cannot pick it with outrage or with charm. You can only wait, and even that must be done to specification. Waiting turns out to be a team sport. Conservationists are the new gatekeepers, and their armor is measured in lux levels and humidity tolerance. They speak sweetly of reversible interventions, as if restoration were a kind of friendly negotiation with the past. Nothing added that cannot be politely removed. Nothing removed that cannot be persuaded to come back. When they say stabilize, they mean tuck the past in with a temperature-controlled blanket. The word invasive, once about armies and now about adhesives, has learned to whisper. Committees produce careful versions of not yet, folded so finely that you can slide them under a door without scuffing the lacquer. The most important instrument is time, calibrated in decades. The second most is restraint, calibrated in meetings. Everyone leaves the hill feeling slightly more patient. The way you leave a tea house smelling faintly of steam. Science arrives. Not with trumpets, but with small briefcases and battery indicators. Magnetometers coast back and forth like calm dogs looking for yesterday's footsteps. They listen for tiny inflections in the Earth's field, and when they find a pattern, they wag in numbers. Resistivity gear asks the hill private questions whose answers arrive in ohms, which is a unit that sounds like it is already falling asleep. Drones map the surface with the devotion of hobbyists who finally got permission to map the surface. Screens display slices of the subsurface as layered gray cakes frosting, filling, frosting, while a researcher points to a line and says, in a tone more bedtime than breaking news, that could be a void. A void in this setting is not a problem. It is a promise with excellent posture. Mercury, if it is down there, does not advertise. It cannot help emitting whispers of vapor the way old libraries emit the smell of warm paper clips. Geochemists collect soil that looks like any other soil and then insist it contains footnotes. Lab reports return with careful adverbs, slightly elevated, potentially indicative, unlikely to trouble anyone's dinner. A century ago, explorers sought doors. Now they seek gradients. In between the equation and the hill, there's a small meadow where caution grows wild. We walk there often. It is low-maintenance philosophy. Perhaps has flowers. Every so often someone suggests a bolder approach, a tunnel, a shaft, a surgical portal shaped like patience that is losing patience. The proposal arrives in an excellent binder. It is read, discussed, admired, and placed beside other excellent binders that have learned humility. The hill has never broken its promise to continue being there. Our best way of keeping it company is to practice the same. There is a lesson in that which parents recognize. The difference between curiosity and jangling the doorknob every 5 minutes, simply to reassure yourself that knobs still exist. Jangling produces no data except the knowledge that jangling is loud. Quiet produces the kind of data that fits under pillows. Day tourists come and go like gentle weather. School children hold hands in tidy pairs that resemble punctuation marks. And the teacher says softly, "This is where the first emperor sleeps," which is both a historical note and a suggestion. Vendors sell trinkets with more confidence than the texts. A bus tries to reverse with the deliberation of a very large turtle, and succeeds, which means the day's logistics will be remembered as triumph rather than parable. The slope remains slope. The wind continues its internship in courtesy. Someone loses a hat and finds a story. Someone takes a picture of themselves and, by accident, also of centuries. Nobody leaves with a piece of the hill, which is the point and also the policy. Night does what it does, practices the art of being identical to itself. Inside the visitor center, a security guard with a thermos performs a route that has learned all the corners. Sensors log what the hill would say if the hill used keyboards. Steady. Cool. Fine. A small moth discovers the infrared camera and, for 10 adventurous seconds, becomes an unexplained phenomenon. The team notes it and also notes that explanations are kind. In a tent, a graduate student changes the color palette on a radar cross-section and finds the same lines more persuasive in blue. This is the science of lullabies. We play the song again in a different key and trust that the meaning remains. Under all of this, under the weather, the paperwork, the kindness of buses stays the hypothesis that knows how to sleep without losing its shape. If rivers of Mercury trace the Empire's map below, they will still be tracing it next season, untroubled by our calendars. If there are only channels of stone where Mercury was rumored into being by a scribe with a taste for shimmer, the architecture itself is still a treatise on commitment. The painted sky, whether mirrored or not, instructs anyone who looks up. Choose your stars and keep them. The sealed door teaches the only lesson doors can teach when they are doing their best work. Some protections are most effective when they do not need applause. We are good at imagining what the interior wants. It might want witnesses. It might want privacy. It might want one careful glimpse achieved by a robot with the tact of an archivist. For now, the hill seems content with our contentment. The new instruments improve the quality of our listening, and the answer remains the same sentence that has always been pleasant to hear. There is time. Beyond the path, the fields proceed with agricultural clocks that would make any empire jealous. Seeds keep appointments without reading edicts. In the distance, a freight train explains supply chains to the evening in a low voice. The hill occupies a different schedule entirely, one in which centuries are not units but moods. What we have learned from this patient structure is oddly applicable to bedtimes. Resolution is not the only route to rest. Often it is the opposite. Put the question on the shelf. Label it legibly. Promise to return when the instruments become even kinder. Let the door continue being the most professional version of itself. The emperor who would not end has managed an excellent compromise. To continue quietly without requiring anyone to stay alert. The metal that may or may not flow is a perfect companion for sleep because it has nothing to prove. If you picture it at all, picture a canal turning slowly in a light that never flickers, a surface that always chooses to be calm, a tiny lacquered boat tied to a ring in the bank, ready for a journey scheduled on the calendar of the unhurried. If you do not picture it, that is fine too. The hill will hold its slope. The pines will approve. The sky above and perhaps below will keep its appointments. And the rumor, which has never missed a night shift, will take another slow lap around the base, making the same gentle sound that an empire makes when it settles in, breathable and unbroken for a very long sleep. You might not expect a pile of earth to have opinions about time, but this one clearly prefers the long version. From a distance, the hill sits like a paused sentence, polite enough not to demand a period. The pines comb the wind into orderly strands. Paths curve with the competence of old rope. You stand at the base, and the slope seems to breathe in the same number of seconds every day, a habit the sun has learned to respect. Somewhere inside, a city that never learned rain keeps its lamps off. If you're still awake by the time we get to the part about astronomers painting pearls into constellations, feel free to subscribe or think about subscribing later, after you've misplaced this thought in a comfortable nap. I support paperwork-free commitments. The hill is not large in the way mountains are large. It is large in the way a sealed envelope is large. Its size is social rather than geological. It rises with the calm authority of an official who remembers every form and never raises a voice. At the crown, a few trees lean as if they're reading. Their shadows walk small, careful routes and clock out precisely at dusk. The brickwork along the terrace doesn't show off. Bricks are the original quiet optimists. They assume tomorrow will come because tomorrow always has work for bricks. Here, they hold back a slope that doesn't really want to slide but appreciates the professional courtesy. Under the turf is order that once traveled in straight lines. People who liked lines and lists and measurements and rooms with corners that met on good terms shaped this mound. The machinery of empire can be loud in the moment and muted forever afterward. This is the muted phase. If you put your ear to the earth, you don't hear drums. You hear the kind of silence that comes from precision packed away. Think of a toolkit so carefully arranged that the air is afraid to move a screwdriver. The official word for this is seal, but it behaves more like a promise left to ripen. There is a story about the emperor who would not end, who arranged not just a tomb, but a schedule. He was thorough in the way sea level is thorough. Official messages traveled out like ripples. Measurements came back like obedient fish. When he chose the hill and signed off on the slope and approved the lacquer that would deny oxygen the satisfaction of breathing, he did it all with the administrative elegance of someone who trusted indexes. The living city bustled. The underground city rehearsed stillness. Somewhere in the planning, a scribe probably doodled a tiny river. Rumor enjoyed the doodle and took a job. No one opens the chamber. That is the first thing a guide says, and the last thing as well, because it makes an excellent bookend. You can tell the sentence is well used. It fits the mouth like a favorite cup. The door that might be a door does not practice hospitality. Caution has the keys and is terrible about loaning them. The hill's biography is written in the negative space of restraint. When rain tries to be clever, drainage reminds it of policy. When wind thinks about renovation, trees file a polite objection and win. 1,000 small refusals make a very smooth surface. It is oddly reassuring. Not everything needs our thumbprints. There are supposed to be rivers under the hill. Mercury, the metal that looks like a secret trying on a mirror, is said to pour through tiny channels like polite lightning. The ancient account uses the word sea, which is generous, but ambition loves water metaphors. Imagine the liquid metal folding itself along the map of a conquered world, gleaming in rooms that never had a weather report. Even if you don't believe the quantity, you can believe the intention. Rulers have always enjoyed compressing geography until it fits on a table. Today we do this with project management software. Earlier people did it with lacquer and metal and an unflinching concept of forever. A surface of Mercury is nearly rude to look at. It returns your gaze too quickly and too perfectly, so your eyes feel accused of something. But in the dark with oil lamps trimmed to patient halos, a Mercury canal would be common sense. A second night where no storms wander in and no wolves attach comets to the moon. The attendants could check the time on the sky and the ceiling at once and choose the schedule they preferred. There might have been tiny bridges whose only function was to suggest crossings that no one needed. Perhaps a small boat was moored to a ring in the stone for form. The boat would never move, which is sometimes the most dignified mode of travel. Above the rumored river ran the less rumored heavens. They painted the night for indoor use, practical as a field guide and ceremonial as a compliment. Pearls took attendance as stars. Black lacquer practiced being eternity. It worked better than any app with a night sky overlay because it was compatible with candlelight and politeness. Imagine a courtier pointing with 2 fingers, never one, and naming constellations that had agreed. For one roof only, not to drift. A scholar could instruct a prince while wearing slippers. Comets could be rendered as neat paragraphs, grammar applied to flame. Even the Milky Way, that complicated spill, would agree to be a tidy ribbon. The entire sky, edited for indoor voices. People like to discuss the traps. There are stories about crossbows waiting centuries for a bad decision. Devices are dramatic. They sip attention like strong tea. But the truly effective mechanism is boredom meticulously engineered. A passage that convinces you it is the wrong passage saves more treasure than a dozen clever springs. A door that reformulates its question every meter until you forget you were trying to answer anything that does real work. The best luck in the world is the phrase, "not yet," spoken by people who mean it and can afford to. Steel fatigues. Intention has a longer warranty. Our era brought new gatekeepers who dress like librarians and speak fluent humidity. Conservators discuss relative moisture the way sailors discuss wind. Their gear looks modest because it is. Lux meters resemble tiny calculators that learned empathy. Data loggers take naps between meaningful moments and then wake up to write beautiful, unexcited numbers. The vocabulary of care has become refined in this place. Reversible intervention sounds like a dance and acts like a promise. Adhesives are judged by their ability to apologize. When the committee says, "we'll wait," it is not indecision. It is the highest compliment they can pay the hill. Waiting has tools now. Magnetometers pace the mound like patient dogs that sniff magnetism instead of lampposts. They wag when anomalies appear. Resistivity surveys send a polite electrical question into the ground and listen for the tone of the answer damp. Dry voids stone with the attention of a therapist. LiDAR floats overhead, counting every twig and brick as if preparing a census. The drones are quiet. They learn the etiquette. The data arrives in polite grace, and a researcher points to a pale line that might be a corridor and uses the word perhaps with professional confidence. Perhaps is the scholar's version of a cradle. When soil samples come back from the laboratory, carrying whispers of Mercury, the reports behave like bedtime stories, measured, repetitive, comforting. Slightly elevated here, somewhat suggestive there. Nothing that would trouble a sandwich. No need for dramatic fonts. The metal, if it lingers, is practicing discretion. Mercury is a show-off in the wrong hands and a monk in the right jar. Under a sealed roof, it would have found its most formal self. It would have pooled like a well-trained thought and cooled the air with the idea of a lake. Fieldwork proceeds with the predetermined drama of weather forecasts. The shade tent is erected at the approved angle. Notebooks open to the page where yesterday ended because today loves continuity. A student checks battery levels with the ritual care of a priest tending wicks. The supervisor explains the plan for the day walk, scan, pause, annotate words that fit around breathing. Local visitors climb the path, listen to the summary, and leave with a souvenir of restraint, a photograph of a door that does not appear in the photo. Everyone participates in the performance of patience. It is the only show in town, and the reviews are excellent. Meanwhile, the hill minds its manners. In summer, it hosts the slow roar of cicadas, which, if you squint your attention, sounds like applause spread over kilometers. In winter, it wears frost lightly, as if flakes were visiting dignitaries who requested no fuss. Rain approaches with the eager feet of a novice and then calms down, finding the drains persuasive. The ground gives back your footsteps unchanged. There is nothing to interpret. The present does not scrawl itself across the site. It shakes hands and leaves quietly dot in another age. There might have been an argument for opening. The future needed impressive rooms to have feelings inside. Our century has acquired other rooms for that, many with gift shops. Here the argument for closure has become the argument for accuracy. Oxygen is the crudest curator. It will ask all the wrong questions and insist on instant answers. Lacquer, on the other hand, was chosen because it keeps its promises longer than we keep our calendars. The ethical math is not complex. If we can learn without touching, we will. If we must touch, we will try to touch, in a way that leaves the past free to change its mind. Sometimes a figure appears in the discussion, call it a robot equipped with eyes that do not blink, and a body narrow enough to apologize for entering. A corridor might welcome such a guest. A gatekeeper might nod. The proposal sits on desks like a bird that will take off eventually. Someone sharpens a pencil, which is the polite version of hope. But the hill speaks in conditions rather than grants. The door may open when openness is safer than secrecy. Until then, we practice listening. Listening happens to be the most economical policy. Listening rewards specialization. One researcher becomes fluent in how bricks release heat after sunset, another in how cypress roots negotiate with history, another in how pearls reflect lamplight versus starlight. No single person knows the whole hill. The hill seems to prefer it that way. When a paper is published, the title is a sentence that goes for a small walk and returns with a graph. The graph looks like a quiet fence you could lean on. People do intellectually and enjoy the view. If Mercury really streams through those channels, the map must be beautiful and a little smug. Rivers love to show off their systems, tributaries performing introductions, confluences hosting meetings. But even if the channels are stone and the metal stayed a rumor, the idea has been here long enough to leave fingerprints on the imagination. Children point downhill and say ocean, and nobody corrects them. Adults point at the sky and say ceiling, which is more accurate than it sounds. Accuracy here does not try to be quick. It tries to be tender. Every empire wants to keep its own weather indoors. This one may have succeeded. A room full of stars is a small weather system, predictable, domestic, immune to clouds. The fact that a person once stood under that painted firmament and believed the heavens could be organized, that belief is the artifact we still possess. We borrow it whenever we make calendars or decide that Wednesday has a personality. We borrow it when we tell the coffee machine to expect us at exactly the same minute every day and congratulate ourselves for being planets. When the site closes at dusk, the security lights hum softly, the bureaucratic lullaby of the modern world. A guard makes a tidy circuit that has learned the guard's footsteps. The logbook waits with the patience of graph paper. Pens sign their own names if you leave them long enough. Out beyond the fence, a night farmer checks irrigation and nods toward the mound the way one nods toward an unspeaking elder. The hill declines to be dramatic. It maintains its shape with the discipline of a bookshelf. Being taken seriously requires no movement at all. What can be known without opening increases in small useful piles. The piles get measured. They get cataloged. A footpath between two tree roots reveals a habit of visitors. People avoid stepping on roots they can see. The analogy is gentle and irresistible. When we finally learn more about the chambers, it will be because we learned how to see the roots. Technicians compare last year's magnetics with this year's and pretend to be disappointed when they largely agree. Agreement is the best kind of data. It naps well. So we arrive at the bedtime hypothesis. If Mercury flows there, it has been flowing without audience for 2 millennia. If no Mercury flows, then the idea of it has been circulating even longer. Both situations are restful. A room might hold stars or an excellent imitation. Both are fine for navigation. A door might guard treasures or simply draw a boundary so expertly that it becomes the treasure. Either way, the hill keeps teaching the same course in patience, a class with unlimited seating and no exam. The more you stand here, the easier it becomes to let the unanswered rest. Your thoughts start walking at the site-approved speed. You find yourself admiring drainage, even when you are far from water. You appreciate the silent loyalty of soil. You respect the bureaucratic purity of a path that chooses not to shortcut. Perhaps you recalibrate your life slightly toward durable materials and away from announcements. Perhaps not. The hill does not grade your homework. When sleep finally ambles over like a friendly official with a comfortable stamp, imagine the painted constellations switching on at the quietest possible brightness. Imagine the metal river, if it exists, holding the reflection steady, even when the lamps flicker. Imagine a boat very certain of its rope. Then forget the details, the way good travelers forget to check their watches. The emperor who would not end invented a building that behaves like a lullaby. It declines to finish. It prefers to continue. We can let it. We can let the sky inside stay the sky, and the door keep its job, and the hill hold the shape it chose. The night will turn over once, and then once again, and nothing urgent will happen except the important business of time, which is excellent at moving forward without comment. You might not think a hill could hold a grudge against calendars, and yet this one seems politely opposed to the passage of time. It keeps its shape like a well-behaved loaf, smooth, composed, and oddly formal for a mound of earth. Morning climbs it with the disciplined steps of a clerk. Evening descends as if someone had filed the sunset under predictable. Path spirals up around cypress and stone and a lazy syllabus. Teaching the same lesson each day, there is a door somewhere, but not for you. If you're still awake by the time I reach the part about electrical resistivity being the world's most patient party trick, feel free to subscribe. Or don't. I will assume you nodded solemnly and drifted into the bureaucratic dreams of very organized dirt. The hill is not dramatic. It will not crack open. It will not lean toward your camera, grateful for attention. It breathes discreetly, an exhale of warm air that remembers the smell of lacquer. The grass is trimmed into ordinary opinions. There is a bench at the top with a view that has rehearsed its lines for centuries. A river, a smudge of fields, a town held together by roofs and habit. Far below, vendors sell water and fruit and postcards of rooms no one has entered in a very long time. The odd thing about a sealed place is how quickly it becomes the center of everything around it. Even the sparrows step closer to the mound as if the earth were whispering seed instructions. The emperor who would not end is responsible for the hill's posture. He liked lists that could be extended and roads that could be counted. He liked the idea of a city that folded under the ground, a mirror arrangement where streets flowed without rain and doors remembered who entered last. Above, he made policy with remarkable stamina. Below, he made stillness with even greater stamina. There is a rumor, there are always rumors, that he arranged the dead as carefully as he arranged the living. No one checks. The rumor is allowed to live its best life, wearing a tidy robe and getting invited to discussions. The upper terraces hold small buildings that perform as if they are buildings, with roofs that sit squarely on their intentions. Stone animals kneel with the patience of furniture. Their faces are neither fierce nor friendly. They are simply thorough, as if the sculptors were asked to make guardians and delivered accountability instead. The path pauses at every gate, where signs explain, in large calm letters, that opening things can be a kind of damage. The letters have the tone of a hospital that has discovered empathy. Visitors nod and go on. Even those who crave a dramatic reveal find themselves soothed by the hill's admin-level professionalism. It's hard to argue with a door that has completed all required training. And then there is the matter of rivers that never get wet. The old chronicle describes a miniature empire mapped in Mercury, pouring through veins of stone like quicksilver handwriting. Imagine canals that shine without water, oceans that never host a wave, seas that greet you with your own reflection. It would be ostentation if it weren't so methodical. The emperor, who had a well-developed respect for maps, might have wanted geography he could pour. He could stand at the edge of his metal Yangtze and check the time in his metal sun. He could watch his Mercury coast send back perfect answers to the question, what does the moon look like in here? The trick of Mercury is that it looks like the future even when it is minding the present. It copies the world instantly, the way a rumor tries to be helpful. If a lamp shivers, the river shivers with it. If a person leans close, the metal records the face as if filing a temporary report. In the imagined silence of the tomb, a channel might have bulged gently each time a servant extinguished a wick. Water would have muttered and bumped itself. Metal would have obeyed. And all the while, air would have been the most carefully controlled substance in the room. The plan relied on air behaving like an obedient note in a ledger, tidy, scarce, and seldom consulted dot above the rivers. So the same old account declares, the sky was brought indoors and treated with respect. Stars became pearls, set into lacquer with the common sense of someone who is counted as far as necessary, and then stopped. The constellations do not drift when they are nailed to a roof. They arrange themselves like a diagram that passed peer review. A small committee might have chosen exactly the number of stars this emperor required to feel in charge after bedtime. He was busy. It would have been considerate to keep the heavens simple. A neat Milky Way, none of this sidereal improvisation. A moon which didn't require chasing. The night finally punctual. People speak of traps as if the tomb were an angry puzzle. Crossbows in the dark, arrows that waited for centuries to file an incident report. But the best mechanism here has always been caution, wound up and set to run very slowly. Imagine a design meeting in which every lever was replaced with a pause. What if someone said, "We make the corridor disagree with footsteps"? The architect nodded. What if the door minds its own business so hard that everyone else follows its example? They agreed. Traps are for quick thieves. Silence handles the patient ones. The hill's defenses are not fangs. They are policies. The modern gatekeepers have similar tastes. They speak of humidity with the gravity of judges. They hand out gloves the color of carefulness. They bring instruments that resemble toys for children who enjoy accuracy, small sensors, data loggers, lux meters with little faces that light up at agreeable numbers. Rather than swords, they wield reversible adhesives and ethics. The slogan stitched invisibly across their jackets could read, "Do no harm, and if you must, make it reversible with a pleasant solvent." When reporters ask if the tomb will be opened, the archivists smile kindly and say, "Not yet. It is the softest way to put a century on hold. Science has learned to listen without interrupting." The equipment that surveys the hill is polite to a fault. Magnetometers stroll along on little wheels, sniffing for changes in the ground's magnetic gossip. Sometimes the hill confides. Sometimes it says nothing. Resistivity machines offer a small electrical handshake and wait to see if the soil grips back. LiDAR floats overhead like a drone that finished finishing school and prefers to write letters instead of shouting. All of their outputs have the same shimmering quality. Patterns that might be corridors under turf, rectangles that might be rooms under more rectangles. Possibility is mapped in grayscale and labeled with the most dignified word in archaeological prose, perhaps dot in the lab. Soil is encouraged to tell stories about metals. The technicians coax out the faintest breath of mercury, measured in numbers so small that the decimal point feels important in ways it never anticipated. These results are announced in reports that unwrap themselves like winter scarves, carefully, in layers and with an appreciation for warmth. A spike here, a hint there, nothing that calls for shouting. It is the kind of evidence you love precisely because it refuses to be exciting. Exciting evidence gets jealous later. Quiet evidence ages well dot, so the hill continues, a place designed for the long breath. The trees at the top remember more breezes than events. The path wears the polish of a million deliberate shoes. A guard walks slowly enough to keep time with the crows. One afternoon, a neighbor brings his small child to see the mound. She turns a circle and calls it a turtle, because children prefer creatures that know how to wait with dignity. The neighbor laughs and buys a popsicle. The hill approves, if hills are capable of approval. It certainly makes room for the ordinary, which is harder than it looks. Meanwhile, back in the sealed dark, the ceiling, if there is a ceiling full of stars, keeps its appointments with itself. Pearls do not get bored. The lacquer's black is still black, a professional darkness that provides good service. If the air is thin, it is the right kind of thin. If the timber frames are patient, they are patient in the old way, with resin that never learned excitement. The tiny bridges over the Mercury canals, should they exist, cast small shadows that no one has stepped into for 2,000 years. Think about being a bridge whose occupation is not crossing, but suggesting. Forever, that crossing would be delightful. If anyone were authorized, the phrase, "not yet," does not mean no. It does not even mean not in our lifetime, though it might casually imply that we, in our lifetimes, are overestimating ourselves. In the conservation tent, scholars pass around photographs of voids like proud grandparents and discuss micropits and lacquer as if they were gossip about the neighbor's hedges. When new funding arrives, it is stacked carefully on the same table as the old funding, and they nod to each other in a collegial fashion. The project has become a kind of university that exists primarily to teach patience to its faculty. Students attend for free if they agree to take good notes. From time to time, a proposal arrives wearing a confident tie. It suggests a slender robot, very polite, sliding in sideways through a gap no thicker than a cautionary paragraph. The robot will see everything it says and harm nothing, and send back images with the charming bleakness of the moon. The committee thanks the proposal for its service, smiles, and asks about reversal, about precedent, about breathing. The proposal tries to breathe. Then it sits down, chastened, and waits to be improved by the next generation of proposals. At night, the folder containing it snores quietly. If you listen long enough, the hill recalibrates your sense of urgency. You begin to rank your own tasks according to their lacquer content. Did you reply to an email in a reversible way? Good. Did you preserve a friendship by not opening a door? Excellent. You find yourself admiring drainage systems and unrelated parts of your life. You become an enthusiastic advocate for the underrated practice of letting things settle. The emperor who loved control would likely approve of your new appreciation for controlled abstention. Power is often measured by how many decisions you can defer without apology. A fun fact, the word Mercury has always been impatient. It rushes through conversation, borrowing metaphors and returning them shiny and slightly slippery. We call swift messengers mercurial. We call thermometers trustworthy unless they are made of mercury, at which point we move them out of schools and into museums. And yet, if the metal really rests in the hill's channels, it must be performing the most unmercurial act possible, staying. Imagine its surface chilled into a disciplined sheet, a discipline perhaps encouraged by the chill of the chamber and the quiet of the time. Even impatience can be trained under the right roof. Astronomy, too, learns humility indoors. The ceiling's constellations assuming their existence with the calm confidence of a bedtime hypothesis could be labeled in small, neat characters. The stars would be as punctual as clerks and as faithful as dogs who have learned the shape of their names. A visitor might have pointed up and said, gently, "There is the river of heaven," and then down to the Mercury and said, "There is the sky of earth." The equivalence would have been satisfying in the same way it is satisfying to find your keys exactly where you left them. This is a feeling empires and toddlers share. What happens, you might ask, if opening would teach us more? The archivist's answer is an entire philosophy practiced with dishpan hands. First, learn everything that does not require touching. That alone can fill a career, and then patiently adopt your students. Second, if touching becomes necessary, do it as if you were only borrowing. A scientist here once described a successful conservation project as an apology executed in gelatin, which is exactly as gentle as it sounds. third, remember that the goal is not to satisfy curiosity. The goal is to keep curiosity employed for a very long time. There's courage in refusing to be interesting quickly. The hill demonstrates this every afternoon at 3, when nothing visible occurs. Buses arrive and depart. Birds consider legal occupations. A couple takes 3 photos and chooses the second because the other 2 seem to have accidentally opened something in the background. Guides recite the rules with the even warmth of teapots. The gatehouse clock needs no drama. It circles politely. If you look closely, the grass behaves as if each blade were on a committee. They vote for stillness and win unanimously. Finally, picture this. You are a small lamp in a vast room that may or may not exist. Your flame is precise. It has practiced for years. You throw your light at a wall that might be the sea, only shinier, and the light returns with excellent notes. The stars above you are in a good mood. They have agreed not to set or rise, which is generous. No dust moves. Your wick evenly shortens. This scene repeats itself for centuries, or it never occurs at all. Both options are equally restful. In one, the world is wonderfully exact. In the other, the world has a marvelous imagination. Either way, the door remains responsible. So we leave the hill to maintain its stubborn courtesy. We walk down past the cypress that whisper the same advice to everyone: breathe slower than you think you should. We pass the bench where afternoons go to retire. We cross the parking lot, heroically unremarkable. The sun approves. The vendors suspect we will return, and they're right. This kind of quiet builds a loyal audience. Somewhere under our shoes is a shape that was meant to last as long as administrators could imagine, and administrators are famously ambitious. It is a good thing to fall asleep near. If you close your eyes now, the painted constellations, confirmed or rumored, will arrange themselves above your pillow, and the river that may be metal will go on holding its reflection with perfect care. The hill will have no opinion regarding your dreams, which is a gift. It will continue being undecided on our schedule and very decided on its own. That is enough. You might not expect a hill to have an opinion about calendars, but this one seems to have chosen the slowest possible week and stayed there. It sits where the plane rises only a little, as if the land took a cautious breath 2,000 years ago and then realized it had committed politely to holding it. Cypress trees lean in like ushered guests at a quiet ceremony. The path curls upward with the persistence of a soft-spoken pencil mark, erasing hurry as it climbs. People arrive with cameras and comparisons and leave with a surprising fondness for bunches. If you're still awake by the time I start ranking humidity in the top 10 historical forces of all time, feel free to subscribe. But truly, do whatever keeps your eyelids from overexertion. This hill will still be here, tidily unruffled, when your pillow has finished its negotiations with gravity. Closer up, the mound looks as though someone ironed it. The grass keeps its side of the bargain. Wayne behaves like a very reasonable memo. From the top, the view is the standard issue panorama fields behaving as rectangles, a river rehearsing a curve, low roofs that know all about afternoons. On certain days, you can see the shadow of something that is not a building. It is the idea of a building, patiently expressed by a contour. Somewhere beneath, it said, corridors imitate streets, and streets imitate the logic of an empire that disliked surprises. The emperor responsible for all this disliked many things: bad omens, missed deadlines, the small untidiness of unnumbered bricks. He preferred lists with ambition and projects that went on the way straight lines go on. If a city could be folded into itself like a map, he arranged for folding. If the world could be counted, he counted. He trusted lacquer and laws in that order. He asked that the final door identify with the concept of closed so thoroughly that language looked to it for guidance. Above ground, the decor practices restraint. Stone animals kneel with the stiff good manners of furniture. Their faces are competent rather than fierce. You could tell them your itinerary and expect them to keep it on file. The gates have plaques that speak in the tone of librarians who have had a good lunch. Please do not open the tomb, they say, but with a long paragraph around the please that includes words like microclimate, microbes, and the soothing parenthetical of irreversible, even the dust, which everywhere else is scandalous, has here taken a position of responsibility. It settles like a clerk, and if you sneeze, it forgives you. There's no drama. There is only the administrative persistence of stone. The emperor who would not end chose to make the world inside because the world outside is famously inconsistent. Outside, rain makes whimsical decisions and confuses travel plans. Inside, one can hire carpenters to teach wood the correct opinions. The roof beams would have been soaked with lacquer until each one acquired the personality of a very careful sentence. The floors would have met the walls at a right angle, a relationship durable enough to outlast empires. And in the middle of this patient geometry, if the chronicles have not been exaggerating for theatrical effect, rivers of Mercury would have flowed to show where seas and canals should be. Not the clumsy water kind of rivers, always evaporating on the moral high ground, but the precise, metallic sort that behaves like a mirror with grander ambitions. Why build a miniature ocean? Because he liked answers that stayed still when he looked at them? Because geography, in his version, would not flood the wrong village or require sandbags? He could pour a coastline and have it agree with him. Mercury has that sly kindness. It reflects without arguing. A lamp wobbles, and the metal duplicates the wobble so beautifully that the original lamp becomes slightly embarrassed. A sleeve passes over the surface and appears twice, as if the chamber contained a second, deeper room that simply prefers richer lighting. The servants would have mastered the correct angle for holding a torch so that the emperors imitated. Archipelagos gleamed without scolding anyone. It would all have been neat, and the grand sense of neatness. And all the while the air, trimmed to the right dryness by methods lost because no one wrote down humidity, would have kept this small universe politely consistent. If you imagine the soundscape, it is a faint hush with occasional shoes. A drop, perhaps. The quiet apology of a wick dot above the rivers, the sky beneath a roof. Not the wandering, half-invented sky we use outdoors, but a version with punctual habits. Pearls for stars, lacquer for night constellations placed with the tender certainty of a scribe, composing names he has written all his life. Perhaps the Milky Way is a ribbon, because ribbons do what they are told. Perhaps the moon glows without phases, because schedule is a virtue. If the roof could talk, and sometimes lacquer looks like a language one can learn, it would sound like a well-trained choir singing. This is enough sky for sleep. Doctrine and astronomy shook hands, and for once, neither tried to leave first dot the entrance. Of course exists. You can't have a tomb without a door. That would be chaos. But the entrance we have is ceremonial, the way a clock in a painting tells time only for itself. The door approaches its job with the zeal of a hinge that has passed exams. Legends insist that crossbows wait in the walls, but the most efficient trap anyone ever devised here is caution. Caution turns out to be mechanical. It clicks, it resets. It requires inspections. The corridors beyond the threshold are not filled with spikes. They are filled with the kind of silence that grows rules. You touch it, and it copies your fingerprint in dust and keeps it on file for 30 centuries. You breathe, and the air observes your ratio of curiosity to good judgment. At the end of a long hallway, there may be a chamber, or there may be a principled refusal to confirm the chamber. Either way, the plan works. The modern gatekeepers continue the plan with such grace that boredom becomes a compliment. Their uniforms are the color of policies. They speak fondly of temperature as if it were a shy volunteer. They carry meters that blink numbers like polite digital birds. Light at the threshold should be a whisper, one says. Footfall pressure must remain on conversational terms, says another. They are not opposed to discovery. They are simply in favor of futures. To open the door today would win headlines and lose tomorrow's. So they prefer featherweight triumphs, a better seal on a protective cover, a dusting technique that lures dust into behaving. When newspapers ask, they reply with the comforting sentence that has become the site's anthem. Not yet. Not yet is a lullaby with a long second verse. Of course. There are old notes about crossbows primed to shoot, and about traps that will pour the past across you in a single unlucky breath. It's a good story. The truth is quieter. Time itself is armed. Put a rush of fresh oxygen into a chamber that has calibrated its solitude since before punctuation marks, and you risk lighting a slow fuse you can't unlight. Wake a lacquer that has dreamed in darkness, and you invite nightmares called flaking and crazing, which sound tiny and are enormous. Release a droplet on a paint that has forgotten what wetness is, and watch it remember too fast. There are locks you can pick, and locks that pick you. The last lock here is made of intention.science, listens from the outside, and practices patience, the way monks practice. Walking with devotion, repetition, and an understated shoe. Magnetometers are the diplomats of curiosity. They glide along the earth on helpful little tires and notice magnetic mutterings. When the soil changes its mind, a magnetometer hears the argument and writes a report. Resistivity arrays long, careful cables lay down and hum electricity through the ground, then measure how the ground hums back. Their graphs bloom like grayscale gardens. Ground-penetrating radar bleeps like a friendly submarine that's taken vows of non-invasiveness. From the air, LiDAR scribbles a version of the hill with light, then subtracts the trees until shape becomes a roomer wearing a suit. Every instrument brings home data that look like ghost floor plans. Every meeting after looks like a support group for professionals who delight in the word. Anomaly. The results can be summarized as maybe, probably, and let's not ruin it to find out. There are places under the mound that reflect signals differently. Long lines that could be corridors, rectangles that might be rooms, and a few very cooperative voids that seem to be auditioning for the role of central chamber. Every color plot arrives with a disclaimer that could tuck a child into bed. Here's what we think we see given light of this type, soil of that disposition, and algorithms which have kind intentions but limited imaginations. Team nods and prepares another gently improved experiment. It's like trying to read an unopened letter by warming the envelope under a lamp. Technically feasible, morally iffy, and somehow deeply soothing. The Mercury question has its own rhythm. Soil samples whisper numbers. A few show a tiny spike, a little metallic shrug too organized to be random. It is enough to keep a pot of tea going permanently in the geochemistry lab. Someone says atmospheric contamination. Someone else says minerals upstream. A third proposes our equipment, which loves calibration so much it occasionally gives itself a present. The graph stays small and persistent, like a heartbeat in a very patient creature. No declaration is made. The paper is written anyway, because science is also the art of alphabetizing caution. Visitors ask for answers, even as they accept the gift shop's magnets. The guides, whose voices have been trained into a friendly dusk, provide the most accurate line anyone will hear that day. Every time we wait, we get better at waiting. It is not only true, it is measurable. New adhesives become kinder. New fibers agree to hold loads gently. We now know, for example, that freshly open air travels like a tourist. It touches everything and buys nothing. We know how to slow that down. We know that a light strong enough to see by is also strong enough to talk Pate into reconsidering its job description. We know fascination sheds heat. There is a lively bibliography of reasons to remain slightly outside. Elsewhere on the hill, a small tent acts like a quiet university. Under it, conservators practice reversibility as if it were a sport. A flake of pigment returning to a test panel becomes as important as a returning king. It is treated with similar ceremony, but better archival storage. Glue is selected the way poets choose words, for its meaning now and its humility later. When a new technician learns to hold a brush so light that a spider might mistake it for weather, everyone applauds by pretending not to. The research log grows in measured handwriting, which is the natural font of patience. Occasionally, a brave idea arrives, wearing optimism and battery power. It proposes a pencil-thin robot to slip into the hill like a rumor. It promises clean selfies and drama-free departures, a kind of endoscopic diplomacy. The committee smiles the way you smile at a puppy that has predicted the weather. They ask practical questions. How will it not contaminate what it explores? If it photographs breath on a lacquered beam, will that breath be ours forever? What does it do in case of beauty? The robot sighs through its inventor and waits in a drawer to grow older and wiser. Even inventions must mature before entering the ancient company of answers. Meanwhile, the world ambles around the mound with its ordinary burdens. A child runs downhill and learns about gravity in the traditional manner. A grandmother shows her grandson how to fold the brochure so the crease doesn't cross the emperor's name. Respect is compatible with geometry. A couple eats bread and oranges in view of a door that will not cooperate. A crow delivers commentary from a cypress, reporting on the fascinating stability of roofs. The skies change season in the routine, professional way. Distant freight trains practice historical continuity by sounding exactly like the ghosts of other freight trains. At 3 in the afternoon, nothing out of the ordinary occurs, which is precisely what most treasures would prefer. If the tomb is opened someday, it will be because the future has learned more ways to be gentle than we currently know. The first breath admitted will be a scholar, and the second will be a promise signed in cooling glue. Lamps will hum at a civic level of brightness. People will speak to each other in pastel verbs, but the hill will not be rushed even by civilization's best manners. It will require a committee of years to vote yes. Between now and then, we are in the golden age of almost seeing, almost knowing. The maps from scanners look like lace. The numbers smell faintly of metal. The report's final paragraph refuses to use the period as anything but an ellipsis. There is comfort in the slow arithmetic. An unopened place stays open in a different way open to interpretation, to wonder that does not overheat the room, to bedtime hypotheses that fall asleep halfway through their own sentences. Once in a while, at the fence, a visitor mentions that opening would answer questions. A guard says, with the grace of a proverb, that questions properly tended can answer the years. The guard might be quoting someone, but probably is quoting the hill. Imagine, for your closing eyes, that the chamber is exactly as the chronicle described. The Mercury rivers are not racing. They are resting like polished roads. The islands are the size of a hand, and a miniature mountain rises with the practicality of a paperweight. Pearls glow from the roof in a spirit of responsible astronomy. A bridge spans a canal so small and so serious that no one has ever crossed it. The air has held itself still for so long, it is almost an object. In the corner, a bronze lamp keeps the idea of fire alive without troubling anyone. The emperor, absent yet thorough, has left everything in order. Or equally peaceful, imagine that inside is simpler, a chamber of plain timber, a platform, a few carefully stacked boxes, an emptiness that exceeds inventory. Both pictures calm the room. Both pictures honor the hill's one true talent, which is to let the mind stroll without ever having to pack a bag. We walk back down in the generously slow company of our shadows. The cypresses murmur in fluent nap. The path arranges our feet into an acceptable rhythm, like a kindly metronome coaching us toward bedtime. Far off, the river keeps its appointment with its curve. Rivers are punctual even when nobody praises them. Vendors discuss the permanent topic weather and sell water as if refilling history were their small contribution. You tuck the ticket in a pocket you won't check until spring. If you wake in the night, you will remember a hill that does not mind being patient, a door that values ethics more than hinges, and a sky that learned to keep still long enough for someone, somewhere to drift off while counting stars that do not.